Hi, this is Daryl Myatt from Keller, Texas. Today is Friday. Looks like February 18th, 2011. Hope you guys are ready for a weekend. I know I am. Anyway, let's have a look at what's going on today. This first story out of the Telegraph.co says Iran is playing a dangerous game of cat and mouse with the Suez Canal. It's been 32 years since an Iranian warship last passed through the Suez Canal. So it can hardly be coincidence that Tehran is now attempting to send two naval vessels through this vital trade artery at a time when the whole region is convulsed by political instability. The main reason, of course, that Iran has been denied easy access to the Mediterranean these past 3 decades is that so long as Hosni Mubarak was in charge of Egypt, there was no way the Egyptian Defense Ministry would provide the necessary approval. As a staunch ally of both America and Israel, Mr. Mubarak could be counted on to keep the meddlesome Iranians at bay. But now that Barack Obama has decided to dispense with Mr. Mubarak's services, he has unwittingly opened up a whole new ballgame. We'll have to wait and see whether the new interim Egyptian government will prove to be as robust as Mr. Mubarak at putting the Iranians in their place. But one thing is for sure, the Suez Canal is now becoming a major security issue both for Egypt and the West. An estimated 70% of our trade passes through the Suez Canal, but if the Iranians are to start meddling in this vital waterway, we may not have the resources to protect our vital interests over there. We have to watch this. I've seen other stories talking about this. In fact, they were given approval by Egypt to go through the Suez Canal. It's been 32 years since Iran has sent one warship through, and now they're sending two. And they're going to go dock up in Syria, right next to Israel. So if they have a warship right there, they're not going to need any kind of missile system because they got the warships that can launch missiles. Oh boy. Here's something out of the Depka file. Israel on high alert for Iranian warship Suez transit. The Karg brings missiles. That's the name of one of the ships. Cairo's approval Friday, today, February 18th, for 2 Iranian warships to transit the Suez Canal on their way to the Mediterranean has brought Israel and Iran closer than ever before to a naval collision at sea. Depka file reports Israel has learned that the Iranian cruiser Karg is carrying long-range missiles for Hezbollah, which it plans to unload at a Syrian port or Beirut harbor. Friday, Israeli government and military officials were urgently casting about for a way to prevent those missiles reaching the Lebanese terrorists. Heavy U.S. and Israeli pressure failed to dissuade Egypt's military rulers from letting the Iranian flotilla through the Suez. So now the waterway has been opened wide for Iran to consign heavy weapons deliveries to Syria and Lebanon. In the first instance, and eventually to try and break Israel's naval blockade on the Gaza Strip and bring Hamas the heavy munitions that were impossible to transport through smuggling tunnels. We need to keep an eye on this situation. Let me see what else it has in here. There's a lot going on with that. You know, Iran is playing this game, and they know what they're doing. And they're up there delivering missiles. They're preparing for war, people. They're getting ready for all-out war. I don't think it's a secret. And I think Israel knows, Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran, they all know what's about to happen. We need to pray for peace in that area like never before, because it's about to get crazy. And I know we've seen things like this be right on edge many times before. But these things are going to happen in God's time, not man's time. But nonetheless, we still need to watch and pray, just like Jesus said. And these are the very things we need to be watching, because these are the kind of signs that will point to the soon return of Jesus Christ. Alright, let's go to WSJ.com. This story says, UN vote on Israel puts U.S. in a bind. The Palestinian leadership is expected to submit to the United Nations Security Council as early as Friday a resolution calling Israeli settlement activity illegal, a move that would likely trigger the first Obama administration veto at the global body. The U.S. has been pursuing negotiations with the Palestinians since December in a bid to convince President Mahmoud Abbas to scrap the resolution, which American diplomats say could undercut Middle East peace efforts, according to officials involved in the talks. On Thursday, Palestinian officials said the U.S. proposal was inadequate. The Palestinian Initiative has placed the Obama administration in a bind. A veto would allow Arab countries to accuse Washington of backing off its policy of discouraging the construction of Israeli settlements in occupied territories, but if the U.S. abstains, the White House will be severely criticized by Israel supporters on Capitol Hill for abandoning its U.S. ally. So they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. We'll see how that plays out. Here's a story out of Arad Sheva. Palestinian Authority ignores Obama and seeks UN condemnation of Israel. The Palestinian Authority is seeking international condemnation of Israel despite the Obama administration's attempts to discourage the move. PA and Arab leaders have submitted a request to the United Nations Security Council to vote Friday to condemn Israel for allowing Jews to build homes within Jewish cities in Judea and Samaria. The resolution would condemn construction for Judea and Samaria Jews as illegal and a major obstacle to peace. In addition, it would state that the UN is prepared to send envoys to the region to examine the realities on the ground. The PA and the Arab world claim Judea and Samaria as part of a future Arab state. Again, I guess we'll wait and see how this plays out, but very interesting what's going on these days. Has anyone else noticed, Egypt's Mubarak has been ousted. Okay, Tunisia's leader, and his name escapes me, I didn't have this as a story pulled up. But both of those leaders, both recently ousted from their countries, and they've been in power for years, both of them are currently in comas and under medical supervision in hospitals. Is anyone else just going, seems awfully strange, how convenient? Well, now, isn't that convenient? I mean, that seems kind of weird that they're both in a coma. I mean, kind of makes you wonder exactly, doesn't it? I mean, I'm pretty sure we don't know the full truth on both those stories, but when I heard Mubarak went into a coma, I thought, okay, maybe the pressure, all the excitement, this whole change of lifestyle, and suddenly having to get out of the country you've been running for 3 decades. But when I heard of Tunisia's leader is also in a coma, I'm thinking, that's kind of weird. Who's trying to shut these guys up? Don't know. Here's something out of the Jerusalem Post. Obama muddles the message on the Muslim Brotherhood. U.S. officials are sending mixed messages in assessment of the largest, most organized Egyptian opposition group. This out of Washington. The Obama administration is sending mixed messages on its position toward the Muslim Brotherhood and its assessments of the group's goals, as it struggles to articulate a policy on the largest and most organized Egyptian opposition group. It is hard at this point to point to a specific agenda of the Muslim Brotherhood as a group, says U.S. Director of National Intelligence James Clapper. He told this to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Wednesday. Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Sorry. When asked about its stance on Iran, weapons smuggling by Hamas, and Egypt's peace treaty with Israel, pressed on the last point, Clapper finally said they're not in favor of the treaty, talking about the peace treaty with Israel. His comments come after criticism he received last week for asserting that the organization is largely secular, which they're not. On Wednesday, he said he had been misunderstood and that he was trying to say that the group tries to work within the framework of a secular government. At the same time, CIA Director Leon Panetta and FBI Director Robert Mueller, who appeared alongside Clapper at Wednesday's hearings, described the group in more ominous tones. Within the Muslim Brotherhood, there are extremist elements that we have to pay attention to, Panetta said. We have to watch very carefully to make sure they're not able to exert their influence on the direction of governments in that region. Mueller said that some members in the Muslim Brotherhood have supported terrorism. So, again, we just need to keep an eye on the situation and watch what's going on over there. Here's something out of Yahoo. It says, Egypt revolution unfinished. Qaradawi tells Tahrir masses. Okay, this out of Cairo. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, a leading Egyptian Islamic theologian popularized by Al Jazeera, returned to Cairo today to deliver a stirring but overtly political sermon calling on Egyptians to preserve national unity as they press for democratic progress. He said, "Don't let anyone steal this revolution from you, those hypocrites who will put a new face that suits them," he said, speaking to at least 200,000 who gathered for Friday prayers in Tahrir Square, the epicenter of Egypt's uprising. "The revolution isn't over," he said. "It has just started to build Egypt. Guard your revolution." Let's see. While this sermon was non-secular and broadly political, the turnout was also a reminder that political Islam is likely to play a larger role in Egypt than it has for decades. I can pretty much bet that's going to happen. Anyway, so I think we're probably going to see a Muslim leadership come up in Egypt and probably also in Jordan. Even if they don't in Jordan, they've already said Israel is the enemy. So Egypt and Jordan, the last two from the Psalm 83 war, the countries named in there, those last two had peace treaties with Israel, and looks like neither one of them is going to here shortly. Okay, here's something I found interesting. Excuse me. Out of the Depka file, Netanyahu lets Egypt build up its Sinai army to 4,000 troops. Without serious aforethought, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Ehud Barak have waved through another 3,000 Egyptian troops into North Sinai, topping their number up to 4,000 and virtually scrapping the key demilitarization clause of the 1979 peace treaty. Interesting. Depka Files military sources report that the men belong to the Egyptian Army's 18th Mechanized Infantry Division. Earlier this month, Israel permitted the first 1,000 Egyptian troops to enter Sinai to guard Sharm el-Sheikh and the hotel and resort strips of eastern Sinai. Senior Israeli military officers report that Israel posed no conditions for its permission then or now, not even demanding a timeline for their withdrawal so that Sinai might revert to the military-free buffer status which buttressed the peace for 32 years. Neither were limits placed on the Egyptian troops' operations and movements. There is little doubt in the IDF's high command that the Egyptian troops are in the Sinai to stay, whereas Israel's forces on their side of the border are seriously undermanned for dealing with an unforeseen cross-border flare-up. Some of the Egyptian units have taken up positions along the main coastal highway from El Arish in northern Sinai to Kantara on the eastern bank of the Suez Canal. Interesting. So Egypt has 4,000 troops in the Sinai now. What if they're suddenly given orders to attack Israel? Man, this stuff is just unfolding at a rapid pace, people. It's... You know, we haven't seen this kind of prophetic Bible prophecies unfolding in a few weeks, months. But it looks like it's getting pretty serious. So we really need to keep an eye on this. We really need to be in prayer. And we really need to make sure that everyone that hears this knows Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. That's the most important aspect of all of this. That's the reason I talk about these things. Just because everything is pointing to how much closer we are to so many Bible prophecies. I mean, Psalm 83 war, Isaiah 17:1, the destruction of Damascus. It's never happened in human history. We're facing it right in front of us right now. Other things like one world government, a one world currency, the Jews building their temple on the Temple Mount, a peace treaty that starts the 7-year tribulation period, you know, the rise of the Antichrist, the mark of the beast. So many of these prophecies are right at the doorstep. That's why I'm keeping an eye on these things. Alright, talking about parables still. And in Matthew 5, verse 1 and 2 says, He went up on a mountain, and He opened His mouth, and He taught them, saying, okay, you probably know this as the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. There's so many names for this. This is the beginning of Christ's most famous public teaching, the Sermon on the Mount, okay? In it, Jesus unfolds what has been called the Constitution of Christianity. For 3 chapters, Jesus is skillfully sketching out what life in God's kingdom does and does not look like. It's pretty clear. He speaks very straightforward in most of that. It's been well stated that everything a person really needs to know about living for God can be found in this sermon. If you haven't read it, I suggest you do. Matthew 5 through about midway through Matthew 7. Actually, I think it's all of Matthew 7. Matthew 5 through Matthew 7. Read all 3 of those chapters. It's a Sermon on the Mount, some of Jesus' most important teaching. But what many people don't realize is that it all ends with a parable. And what's more, the parable is perhaps the most important part of the entire sermon. Okay, I'm going to read to you from Matthew 7, verses 24 through 27. And I'm using the New King James Version. Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, this is Jesus talking, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock, and the rain descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. But everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand, and the rains descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Let me just remind you right there, built their house on the rock. Who's the rock? Jesus Christ is the rock. All right? So we have 2 men, 2 houses, 2 storms, and 2 dramatically different outcomes. One stands securely, and the other one gets washed away. What was the difference? And what was the parable's point? The difference was application. Okay? The man who survived represents those who hear and apply God's word, while the man who fell represents those who do not. You know, hearing is one thing, but doing it is another. That's a saying that my boys now know, because I've drilled it into their head. You know, hearing it and doing it are 2 different things. That's what Jesus is talking about right here. So this illustrates the parable's points. Christ's teaching will only be effective when we actually apply them in our lives. It's not a matter of hearing a great sermon that's going to make or break us in the day of adversity. It's a matter of living out a simple one. We have to take these words that God gives us, that Jesus tells us, and we have to apply them. You know, what are the greatest commandments? When Jesus was asked, Jesus said the first and most important commandment is to love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And the second greatest commandment is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. Yesterday we found out that our neighbor is not just our next door neighbor. Our neighbor is everybody. In this global community, this world seems to be getting smaller and smaller because we can see what's happening in Egypt in real time. We can see what's happening in Israel right now as it's happening. Everyone's our neighbor. We need to pray for our neighbors. We need to love our neighbors as ourselves. And I know, for me, especially I know, sometimes that's really hard. I have people on here almost daily that curse me and call me names. And yet I'll reply back to them and pray for them. And then when they continue to curse me and call me names, I'll block them. Because I have no time and I'm not going to put up with that. I'll plant one seed, and if it doesn't grow, that's it. So we need to apply what Jesus tells us. Read Matthew 5 through 7 and see how much of that you apply in your life. And I encourage you, over the weekend, try your best to apply everything Jesus told us in the Sermon on the Mount, and apply it in our lives as the way we treat others and the way we view this life, this gift that God has given us. I pray you have a great weekend. I pray you go and worship our great God and Savior this weekend. Take somebody with you, somebody that needs to hear the Word. God bless you. Good Lord willing, I'll see you again on Monday. Have a great weekend.